So crazy weather, huh? So about ready to get started. This is checking in with mapping in Drupal 7. So if you wanted to talk about not mapping stuff, this is not the right room. But otherwise, welcome. Thanks for coming. Thanks for showing up. My name is Brandon, and I'm a developer at Phase 2, and I don't have a remote, so you'll have to bear with me leaning over. So I'm a developer at Phase 2 Technology. We're a company based out of Washington, D.C., and we do a lot of Drupal stuff. We maintain probably, as a company, we maintain probably like 3 dozen or so modules, and we're in charge of distributions like Open Atrium and Open Public and things like that. So we do lots of neat, cool Drupal stuff, and that's pretty awesome. So what I'm going to talk about today is geospatial, how to do mapping and geospatial stuff in Drupal. So why geospatial? Let's take a step back. Why is it important to know where something is? My background, even though I'm a developer now, my background is actually in journalism. And when you learn to be a good journalist, the main thing that they teach you is that you need to know about a story. You need to know who, what, when, where, why, and how. Like, you need to know all these different aspects about something, about a story, in order to actually convey the full idea of what's going on. And I feel like that the internet is kind of the ultimate storytelling mechanism. I mean, that's what we're all here to do. We share information. We share stories. And if you're putting together a site and you're saying, oh, well, I want this event calendar and I want people to show up at my events and stuff, that already you have what's going on with an event, you have a time with it, and where is also important, because if you don't tell people where it is, then they're not going to show up. So geospatial, like just having location-aware data is very, in my opinion anyways, is a very important consideration to take when you're architecturing and constructing sites. On top of that, it's also a really good way to kind of get a different view of what's going on, to get a different view of a situation, and just kind of get an idea of what's important. Does anybody know what this map is? It's okay if you don't, because I'll tell you. But no. No. No, that would be very bad if it were. Yeah. This is a map. It's widely considered one of the first infographics used. It's a cholera map. So in 1845 in London, there was a massive outbreak. I forget the road name. There's a really good book about it, and I'll suggest it later if you're into this sort of thing. But basically, London, 1845. There were, at that time, they didn't really have a good idea of how germs work. Germ theory wasn't really here yet. And there was a major cholera outbreak. At the time, the prevailing theory of how cholera spread was through the air. So they thought, like, if you had cholera and you coughed on someone else, that's how you got it. How you really get cholera is through germs. You drink, water that people have released fluid. We'll just go with that. And that's how it's transmitted. But at the time, they didn't really know how that was set up. So what you can see up here is, so with this particular outbreak, there is a pump kind of near the center here. Should have a laser pointer with me, right about here, which they determined was a well that had cholera. And they used this map to kind of help pinpoint where people were getting sick. And because the creator of the map, John Snow, because he decided what, I need to take a step back and see what's going on. This is how we can do that. And one of the interesting side tidbits of this is that so there's a lot of death and destruction right by where the pump is, but there happened to be a monastery across the street where like nobody got sick. Like everybody else around them just got like horribly sick. This one monastery didn't, and it's because they brewed beer and they just drank their beer. So, lesson learned, kids: drink beer. Don't get cholera. So yeah, so I happen to think that mapping and stuff is a really, all that goes to say that mapping is a really cool way to kind of get a wider picture of what, or at least a different facet of the information that you're trying to display. And so basically the rest of my presentation today is talking about various strategies that you can use to, with Drupal to store and display mapping information. I'm going to go through a list of modules, kind of show a few things. If you guys have any questions along the way, please shout, heckle, whatever you need to do. When I think about geospatial on the web, I tend to break it up into 3 different segments. You have a data layer, so that's like the actual raw information that you're talking about. That's saying like this point right here at this address, or this line that makes up a road, or the county area of Ames. I guess Ames is not a county, but the county area of the city limits of Ames. That is all like a data layer for that. And then when we're talking about web, we're also talking about a tile layer. Tile layer is typically, it's static information that kind of gives context to the actual display info that you're putting up front. If anybody's done graphic design work, the one easy way to think of the difference is that a data layer is a vector, so like an Illustrator file, so it's the raw vector info, and then the tile layer is like a flat file, so like a JPEG or a PSD file or something that the information is locked in and rendered basically. And then there's the interface layer. So the interface is the library or libraries that you use to actually interact between the two. So those are things like the Google Maps engine. So like whenever you use Google, that's their JavaScript library. That's Openlayers. That's Leaflet. That's there are lots of engines out there. So I find it's helpful to kind of break it up like that. It's quasi MVC, but it's more like 2 models and a controller. So it's something. And then you put all that together and you have interesting map information. In Drupal 7, the primary way that we actually interact with raw geospatial information is a library called GeoPHP. It's pretty bare bones, and basically all it does is it takes information for geospatial stuff that like you would store it in a database, and it allows you to convert it to different formats. So if you need to spit out like a JSON file that's geospatially aware, which we call a GeoJSON file, you can do that. It also allows you to do operations on it, so you can like simplify a line. So if you have like a line that has like 100 points and you want it to go down to like 20 points but still have basically the same shape, you can do that. You can find information about your geospatial object. Taking back a step back a second, when we're talking about mapping, you're usually mapping one of 3 types of items. It's either a point, which is a single point, a line, which is a set of points, and then an area, which is, or a polygon, which is a enclosed line. So I mean, we all remember geometry, so same basic idea. And then GeoPHP is our raw library for that. Basically, it's a wrapper around. There's a server level application called Geos, and what GeoPHP does is it wraps around that. So if you don't happen to have that installed on your server, you can still do all these functions just a lot slower because we implement it in PHP versus implementing it in C. So, and that just makes it all run quickly. The next step in Drupal 7, the Geofield module is kind of the primary storage mechanism for storing geospatial information in Drupal. I'm biased. I maintain this module, so there are some other modules that do similar things. If you've been around Drupal for a while, the location module has done the same thing for a while, and it's great if you need that. Geofield fills kind of a similar niche, except it allows you to store lines and polygons as well, so if you need more complex information. There's also another module called geolocation, which is basically if location was written in Drupal 7 from scratch, that's what geolocation is. Geolocation is nice because it has a better widget than Geofield for data input, which we'll probably steal at some point, but we'll get there. But yeah, Geofield is flexible. You can store all kinds of info in it, and it ties in with a lot of different systems. So I'm going to kind of do a quick demo of that. Wrong one. I swear I use computers on a daily basis. All right, so I set up a basic dev site or demo site for doing some mapping stuff. Kind of show what a basic field does. So Geofield comes bundled with a Google Maps implementation for display, but it also ties into some other systems that I'll talk about later. And that's how I'll be displaying this. So this is through the bundled Google Maps thing. So with Geofield, it's pretty easy to do. I looked up. All right, so Ames is at 42, negative 93.6. So if I wanted to save a basic point, that's pretty basic. And that's just one of the widgets that we have. So I can go to the field and say that I would like to use HTML5 geolocation to set that. And basically all that does is on whatever device you're accessing, Drupal will ask, hey, phone or hey, computer, will you share your location with me? You give it access to do so, and then you can drop it in. So the way it works in Chrome, it puts a bar up here. It says that my local host wants to know my location. I say, sure, I'll give you my location, and then it auto-populates it. So you can do that. That's pretty simple. And then there's a few other widgets too. So by default, we have well-known text, which is just a format that you would normally see with like database storage. We use that mostly for debugging purposes. GeoJSON, so it's another type of format that you wrap all that in. Latitude, longitude input, which is what I just showed, and then bounds. So bounds is basically 4 points. You pick a top line, a bottom line, a left line, and a right line, and it gives you a polygon. So I can show that real quick how that would render. So if we go 41, negative 86, 38, and negative 84, we should get a polygon that renders. And yeah. So I thought I broke it, so I'm glad it didn't break. So yeah, so that's the basis of it. Geofield ties in with the feeds module. So like if you have, say, a giant field, a giant listing of geospatial information. For example, a demo that I'll show later, where we're pulling a GeoJSON file provided by the United States Geological Services of all the earthquakes that's happened in the last 30 days. It's easy to import that through feeds. if you have like KML files, you know, which is what Google Earth uses, you can do like a GPS tracker files. So I forget the exact extension for that, but you can import that. If you have geotagged photos off of your camera, you can upload that, and it'll pull the information from that. So I mean, there's lots of different widgets and neat things you can do with that. So, and that's with just Geofield by itself. Questions, and we have views integration too, because what module doesn't have views integration? So you can do like a map of all of your nodes and that sort of thing. Questions, comments so far?
So with the views integration, you can have a bunch of nodes with one point and just map them all.
Yeah, I can show you how to do that real quick. Actually, I think I've already written that. Well, it's not up yet, but I can definitely show you how to do it. So with the bundled map, Geofield map, we have a views display, basically. So like you would do a table or a list, you do a map. So show content of basic Geofield. We're going to create a page. We're going to display an Openlayers map. There's a little bit of config that you have to do. Oh, not Openlayers map. That comes later. Sorry, I have too many things turned on at the same time. We want a Geofield map. A thing to note with the bundled map display, it's really good for like pretty basic implementations. Like, I just want to throw a map up and I don't really care how it looks like or anything like that. If you want much in the way of configuration, that's not what the bundled map library does, but we'll talk about a library that you have a little bit more configuration with later. So with the bundled library, you have to add the Geofield itself. So add that as a field. Say OK. We go to the settings for the display. We tell it that our data source is the Geofield. We have and we can do like a pop-up text for that. And then there's some settings for how you want the map to display. And that's an error. We recently swapped out how we do data storage and with Geofield, so like I'm still hunting down bugs from that. So it's broken there, but just trust me, it's a really awesome map when it's done. Cool. So I mean that's Geofield. Geofield's pretty awesome, I think. Another module that's really, really cool is the Geocoder module. And what Geocoder does is it allows you, so when you're putting something on a map, most mapping libraries don't take 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue as an actual location. It sees that as a string, and it's like, I don't know what that is. Geocoding is basically the process of taking that and turning it into lat long points or into something that the map actually can handle. I think the Geocoder library also does reverse geocoding, but don't hold me to that. And that would just be the process of you have a lat long point and then it turns it into a string that's an address. So, yeah, you get that. Geocoder ties in with Geofield, the location module, and I think it also ties into get location or geolocation as well. So the three data storage things that I mentioned earlier. As far as the libraries that it ties into, you can connect to Google, Bing. Like there's like 7 or 8 libraries that you can tie into, and they all have different terms of services and that kind of thing. So depending on what you're trying to do and how much volume you have coming in, you need to pay attention to that. But otherwise, it's it's a pretty flexible system, and if you happen to have like something custom that you need to tie into, let's say you have like a internal database of locations, in like an SQLite file or something, you can write that Geocoder plugin to do all that as well. And granted, you would have to do the actual like search logic and all that on your own, but if you need to tie it into this system, it's relatively easy to do so. So a quick demo of geocoding. So we can add, actually don't know what I have that set up to point to. So we'll do it on both. So actually I can just show you what's set up to in the setup, because it's important to know how it's all put together. So when you're actually doing the geocoding itself, you point it to either like a text field or an address field or something like that, and then it does the conversion for you. And then Geocoder itself is basically just a widget on Geofield. So if I go and edit that, I can tell it which field to pull from, so the title or one of the two address fields. Currently it's just my single text line. I can tell it which geocoder to pull from. So yeah, you have a pretty decent list of things. And then some of the things too are also like a KML file, so it will just, you can upload a KML file and it'll parse it and that sort of thing. You have a few different settings that are dependent on what library you use. So, you know, for example, when you geocode something with Google, it gives you a few options as far as like, you know, how specific do you want it to be? If you mistype something, do you want Google to basically give you its best guess? Do you want it to give you like a whole range of options? Things like that. So you have a few places to, or a few settings you can do with that. Does anybody happen to know the address or an address on campus somewhere? All right, well, screw it. We'll do the White House. I like to try to keep it local, but you know. So it should churn and think about it. There we go. It would help if I actually clicked the button. And assuming that the map loads, that should be in Washington, D.C. Yeah, I think so. Because the point's actually saved, it's just that the tiles aren't pulling up. So you'll have to take my word for it. Oh well. Anyway, live demo, that's how it goes. So yeah, with Geocoder, it's pretty easy to tie it into different systems like that. And it just helps with the user experience a lot, because I mean, nobody really wants to go and, you know, hunt down, okay, where's my lat long point, or what's, you know, how am I putting all that in? So I mean, if you're having, hey, there we go, we have some tiles. That looks like DC. So so yeah, I mean, like, you know, it makes it easier if you're trying to like pull information from lots of people and that kind of thing. And it's a big UX win, so I think it's cool. Questions, comments so far? Cool. Views GeoJSON is it's a cool module in that it basically provides a display output of GeoJSON, and all that is it's a commonly agreed format for storing geospatial information in a JSON format. And what's nifty about that is that it makes it easy to integrate with external systems. So like if you have a large database of, you know, thousands upon thousands of geolocated nodes, and you want to pull it into you know, another system, like I'm going to talk about TileMill later, so like, you know, something else that's not Drupal, that's an easy format that works pretty well with that. So it's pretty easy to kind of gang stuff with that. So definitely worth checking out if you need to get information out. Tile layers, you know, if you're dealing with Google, you know, Google obviously has, you know, kind of the ubiquitous, you know, map in general. So I mean, Google has a good tile layer set that can be used in a lot of different places. OpenStreetMap is anybody not familiar with OpenStreetMap? Cool. So OpenStreetMap is basically like the an open source group that maps things. So you can go there. A lot of different services are starting to use their information to actually do their own mapping stuff. For example, Apple recently released their own mapping service for the iPhone, and they're using a lot of OpenStreetMap information. So it's basically people can go around and say this road goes here, with like a GPS device, and point out where things are supposed to be, and then kind of give better context to other areas. And then because we're all Drupal open source fans here, that's kind of cool because it's not just one big company doing it; it's the community doing it, so which is awesome. Mapbox. Who knows anything about Mapbox? Awesome, because this is my favorite part of the demo. All right, so when you're dealing with maps, sometimes it's easy to display like a single point, or like a couple of polygons or that kind of thing. But let's say you want to display, say, every earthquake that's happened in the last 30 days. That's a lot of information to parse. I mean, you're talking about especially if you're looking at like low magnitudes, you're talking about displaying thousands of points on a map, and it's kind of hard to really get any context from that. And if you display it like you normally would, like say on a Google map, what happens is that Google will add those points as individual DOM elements in your HTML. And I don't know if you've ever tried doing that before or not, but more than like a couple of hundred on anything besides Chrome sucks. And that's just not good. So what Mapbox does is it basically allows you to create your own tile layers. And it's put out by a company named Development Seed. They used to be involved in the Drupal ecosystem for a long time, and they've kind of gone on to do this thing. But it's really cool, and it's definitely worth a demo, which I'll do right now.
Would you just said it allows you to create
Own tile layers.
tile layers?
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I tend to trail off when I get excited, so it's like, oh, yay. All right, so probably would help if I got the screen about the right size. All right, so this is TileMill, which is their actual map creation service. It's just a local application you can run on Windows. It's a Node.js application, so it's got that fun coolness to it as well. You can run on Windows, Linux, Mac, and what it allows you to do is, so it has a lot of pre-saved information as far as this is the default map that you see. So it's pretty basic. Like this is the ocean, and this is not the ocean at this point. I think it has a few country lines in it too, but they're really faint. I don't know if you can really pick that up on the monitor or not. But and what I've done is I've gone ahead and added a layer that I pulled from USGS. So if you Google USGS earthquakes, you'll probably run into a page that has tons of information that you can download. And I just grabbed the latest JSON file for all the earthquakes that have happened. So all I did to add that was add layer, point it to a file from here, and TileMill grab that information. But currently I don't have any styling info set up to it. The way that styles are set up through here is a language called Cardo, and it's basically CSS. It's like if you've done something like Sass or less, it's more or less the same syntax. So you can do nested embed things and that kind of thing. So if I go and I uncomment my earthquake CSS and hit save, now I have all the points just displayed. And again, these are rendered flat images. This isn't a vector layer on top of it. So if you pull it in on a map or anything, it loads really, really fast. because you're just pulling in JPEG images or PNGs, I think is how it's actually exported. But so it's just flat files, which is really cool. And the way that the styling language works, you can kind of pick up on meta information that's embedded with the data. So, for example, in our database, we have, in addition to the location, we have a textual representation of the place, we have a magnitude, we have a time. You'll notice that all these are just individual points. It doesn't really give you any context to which were the big ones. You get an idea for where fault lines are because there's lots around them, but you don't really know okay, was this a big earthquake? Did people actually notice this or not? And it's pretty easy to can you guys read the text okay? Cool. So it's pretty easy to just pick up on that. So I've written some Carto style that will basically say if it's a bigger magnitude, make it more obvious, make it more prevalent on it, which just makes it a better infographic because now it's oh, hey, there's a lot of earthquakes right there, and I shouldn't be there because that sounds awful. So, and then the way this is set up, you can add all kinds of different context layers on top of it, and you can export the files into a format that's called MB tiles. And then if you go, you can either go to, you can either host them yourself with a open source server that they provide on GitHub, or you can actually host it on their platform and everything. It costs a little bit of money, but there are far more expensive things you could spend money on for licensing stuff. So I think their initial so they've got a free level, and then the next level after that it's $20 a month. So it's it's cheaper than a Flickr account, so, or roughly equivalent anyway. And then Mapbox itself has some cool features and stuff to it as well. So that's pre-rendered stuff, and it's pretty easy to pull all that into Drupal as well. So what I've used this for on projects is I'll have my Drupal database that has a few things that I want to render on a map, but I want to provide context to that. Say I'm working with a forest preserve that has their own geospatial information that they keep in their own proprietary formats and stuff, and they want to be able to say, well, here's our hiking trails that don't really show up on Google Maps, and here's a few other things. So I can take that, put it into Mapbox, and then add that as a tile layer on top. And then that kind of provides that extra context without having to actually add that to the database, to the actual Drupal database, which could potentially get pretty bogged down with that, if that makes sense. So, questions, comments while I get some water? Shoot. Yes, so for the import, it'll do CSV files. You can point it to Google Docs, which is kind of an interesting feature. I'm pretty sure it does KML files, and GeoJSON is what I typically format in, just because it's pretty easy to work with it in both Mapbox and Drupal, and then a few other libraries. But yeah, if you have it in KML, it should work too. One thing that it won't do, though, so if you pull in a KML file, KML files will have embedded styling with it. I don't think it picks that up automatically, but it's pretty easy to recreate that if you need to. Next, we're going to talk about the Openlayers mapping library. We're kind of running a little low on time, but that's all right. So basically, Openlayers it's a mapping library engine. It's been around for 4 or 5 years at least, and it's really robust. You can do a lot of different neat things with it. Something, if you're interested in what the engine's capable of, just look up Openlayers examples, and they provide a couple of hundred different examples of crazy neat things that you can do with the library itself. I'm going to talk primarily about the module Openlayers, though, the Drupal module. And what that is basically just an integration library for for the JavaScript Openlayers library. We need better name spacing in Drupal. It's hard to be like, oh, it's the module, not the library. That anyway. So with the Openlayers module, we provide a few additional niceties for things like Geofield. One thing that's cool is we provide an input map. So if you're familiar with what location used to do, you would enter your data either as an address, or you could just pick a point on a map and draw it, or draw your polygon and that kind of thing. So that's one thing that the Openlayers library provides, or the module provides rather. So if I wanted something that was the United States, it's pretty easy to just kind of This is the highest fidelity United States you've ever seen. So it's pretty easy to, and I drew it as a line instead of a polygon because I wasn't paying attention. But yeah, so this is the border of the United States, and then it, that gets saved, and you can display that back out. You'll notice this is this isn't the Google Maps, so this is the Openlayers render of that. And then the way that Openlayers is set up, it's you can swap out how that's displayed. So Openlayers can ingest lots of different tile layers and that sort of thing. So you can pull. Let's say you want your own mapping engine, you want to use Openlayers, but you really like how Google Maps looks. You can use their tile layers. You can pull from. I don't know why we still have Yahoo, because I'm pretty sure they stopped doing maps like 6 months ago. Anyway, so you can do like MapQuest, which MapQuest and Virtual Earth, which should be relabeled Bing. So the Bing layers are really cool. You should check Bing Maps out. They have a nice display. It means you're doing something with Microsoft, but if you can get past that, it's pretty cool. Yes, sir. Like everything else, it depends on the provider. So like Google Maps, for example, will only let you hit their database server for, or not their database, but their mapping library. Like I think it's somewhere like 50,000 hits a day or something like that, which for a lot of sites that's not a big deal. And then after that, you've got to you have to pay basically to get in, and then it really depends. Like Bing, you have to register with a site key basically. And I know there's a pay at some point. I'm not super familiar with where that kicks in though. So it depends on your provider. Is the short answer. Yeah, and so like with Openlayers, it's you can pull in two different types of layers. So there's the base, like if you remember the data and the tiles discussion from earlier, you can pull in vector layers from other places as well. So if you happen to have just a raw KML file you want to display, you can pull that in, or a raw GeoJSON file, you can do that, or you can also use the views integration that Openlayers provides and pull from your internal database and say, I want to display all these nodes that I have located, and then arrange your pop-ups and that sort of thing around that. The interface for actually creating maps in Openlayers, the module is so the module's been around for a little while, and it's kind of gotten a reputation for being heavy and gross and hard to use, and that's mostly justified. It's getting better. So that's I know that there's a patch from a new maintainer that's looking to kind of revamp all this to use the standard CTools integration for at least these pages. So that should be a little bit nicer, mainly because it makes the actions over here make a little more sense. Because, for example, if I clone this, I can potentially just overwrite what I have in my database, which is what an edit function normally be with like views and that sort of thing. So it's not quite obvious what you're doing sometimes. But that should be cleaned up. And if you have the settings turned on for a preview map when you're actually doing the maps, it's not that bad anymore. Like you can mess around and say, well, I want to pull in Google Street Map or Google Satellite instead, and hit the preview, and it's a little more obvious. There's an ongoing bug when you actually use Google layers with Openlayers that this pop-up shows up all the time. So I know I've fixed it a few different ways for different projects, but it's just been an ongoing thing. It has to do with how the Openlayers library itself interacts with Google and attribution and stuff. So it's just a weird thing. But yeah, so I mean that's Openlayers. There's a lot more to kind of go through with Openlayers itself. There's a O'Reilly book that's a good introduction to it. It's Mapping with Drupal or something to that extent. Two of the maintainers of the Openlayers module wrote it. You can usually catch it on a half-off sale once every couple of months for $10, and then even then it's only 20. So it's if you're interested in that sort of thing and kind of want a deeper dive into that. You're right, and if that's covered by it, then awesome. Yeah, I wasn't sure what was covered by those, so yeah, if you're interested in mapping, check that one out. Do you have a question or no? Okay. Leaflet. Quickly going through. So Leaflet is another library that you can use to do mapping displays and everything. It's a little bit newer, and it's a lot more lean. It has an API that's or a JavaScript API that's very similar to Google Maps, and it's definitely a lot easier to work with. Like I was mentioning before with Openlayers, though, Openlayers is very feature heavy. So like there's lots of things you can do with Openlayers. That's not really the case with Leaflet. Leaflet's got a much smaller feature set, but it's lighter and it uses some more HTML5 goodness to actually do the map displays and stuff. So it's pretty cool. It works really well on mobile phones. So that's something worth checking out. And there's a module for Leaflet too that's also kind of in this similar state where you can do displays for Geofield and it has some basic views integration, but beyond that, there's not a ton going on with it. But it could definitely use your help. So, but we're getting to that. So, like I was mentioning earlier, we kind of have three major components to doing mapping with Drupal. We have our data layer, our tiles, and the engine that actually displays said maps. The future. So with Geofield specifically, there is a stable 1.1 release that's been out for about two-ish months or so. And we have an unstable dev release that has lots of cool, neat features. We're looking to do some cool things like pluggable backend architecture. So if you happen to be running like a geospatially enabled database, we can store that natively and do good, we can kind of speed up your distance queries and that kind of thing, for example. We're also looking at just trying to make the interface a little bit easier to get into and to work with and that sort of thing. Geospatial work in Drupal in general has kind of gone through kind of a rocky couple of years or so. And there's been a lot of maintainers kind of moving in and out of the community. So if this is something that you have any interest in contributing to, I'm not saying that we'll just immediately make you like king map person or something, but we could really use the help. We're always on IRC. It's a Drupal-Geo and Freenode. We're there. I'm there pretty much all the time during work hours. So if you have a question or anything like that, feel free to ask there. The issue queues we're pretty active in, and we've been having a monthly office hours for doing mapping stuff. And that's a good place because to kind of come in. We do it once a month. Usually it's like the first or second Thursday. So we'll probably be announcing the next one here in the next few days. you know, if you have any interest in this and just, you know, contributing or just wanting to stop by and say hi and thanks, come say hi to us and all that. So, yeah, that was the how I can help. I always get those slides backwards, so. Well, that didn't render well. Oh, well. I have the slides up at this URL. I'll also make sure that this is part of the DrupalCorn page for the particular session. And basically, it's the slides and just general notes and links to various things that I talked about today. Any other questions, comments, or anything before we wrap up? Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the question was, once you actually have the Mapbox tiles, how do you display them in Drupal again? And it's Openlayers is what we'll use. You can also do it with Leaflet. So the Leaflet, you can point to that URL for that as well. And that's a little more obvious when you actually are starting to use the module. But yeah, Leaflet will handle it, and Openlayers will handle it. So we all are. It's a very unfortunate thing. One thing that I'm actually really interested in trying to at least get something initially written is, so there's a lot of mapping libraries out there, like mapping JavaScript libraries. And to integrate them into Drupal, they all basically have to do the same sort of scaffolding. Like they all kind of need to have the same hooks, and they all kind of need to do similar things. So what I would like to write is a generic mapping module. There is a module that was written a long time ago called Mapstraction, which tried to do that. But what Mapstraction does is it tried to encapsulate everything. So it said, we have a common API for creating a point, and then it depending on which mapping library it uses, it abstracts that out. I'm not looking to do that. I'm looking more to do basically the scaffolding for, if I have a custom library, or even not even a custom library, and I want to be able to tie it in to Drupal, how do I do that? And then we'll probably actually use the Openlayers module as a model for that, because despite the many horrible things that you can justifiably say about the module, it has a pretty strong base architecture that makes it relatively easy to add functionality to, and I would love to be able to build on that and kind of make it work with anything, in theory. So that was a very long answer to not your question, but yeah. So cool. If there's no other questions or anything, thanks for showing up. I have another session right after this on theming, but if anybody wants to boff on either one of those things, just grab me and we can do whatever. So thanks, guys.